as the connections made during years of study here help establish fruitful social and economic links in our region. The numbers of overseas students in Australia have almost tripled since 2000. In 2009, the number of overseas students in higher education in Australia hit 200,000, and in all sectors, 600,000. Policies such as changed visa and residency qualifications and broader economic settings, including the strength of the Australian dollar, see those student numbers rise and fall fairly severely from time to time. And I'd like to quote from my own newspaper this morning. If you buy the Australian, you don't have to, you'll find a higher education supplement in there. And inside, writer is talking about the latest survey of world universities and says, the research success of almost all Australian universities reaching the top 500 has been dependent on the de facto policy coupling of increased research funding and international student fee revenue. He says, to maintain Australia's research momentum, our international student market must be revived to ensure the successful Australian policy tango does not misstep. And that policy tango includes, as I said, questions like visa and residency qualifications and economic settings. To my mind personally, a disappointing feature of Australia's educational engagement with Asia is that so few Australians ever go to study in Asia. It's surprising to me how little effort goes into getting Australians to study in the region. This is the missing link that would help propel a deeper and more fruitful engagement. Although Australia's economy depends crucially today on its resource exports, its international brand image is based on soft features, lifestyle and tourism, and this should help foster a greater engagement with Asia, with education at the core. The previous Chinese ambassador to Australia, Zhang Juncai, told me in an interview before he left at the end of last year that each nation has its strong points and education is one of Australia's. But it should be better managed, it should be one of Australia's policy priorities. China has been the biggest source of foreign students in Australia over the last 5 years, with Beijing claiming that the numbers have reached as high as 130,000 a year, both tertiary and secondary. Zhang said, quotes, "My view is that the export of education is closely related to your migration policies. Here, a stable policy is beneficial to both sides. Why have the number of Chinese students fallen? One reason is the closure of some private training colleges, which made a big psychological impact. This event was poorly managed at the time, with more than 4,000 Chinese students affected. However," he said, "the Australian federal and state governments did then move very quickly to solve the problem. It was settled by making sure students were transferred to other colleges, were given rebates and were still able to graduate, and were allowed to apply for permanent residency, PR, in future. PR. In future," he said, "Australia has to advertise its education services more accurately." And he said, "The rising value of the Australian dollar has an effect. But if you provide very good services, you don't have to worry whether students will continue to come. Quite a lot want to come here for the quality of the education, not for its price." He said, "They think they may also have the opportunity to gain PR, and during an economic boom, that's no problem. They can usually find a job. Getting PR doesn't mean they will stay forever becoming a citizen, but it does provide the opportunity for gaining work experience. Their future is back in their own country, which is developing very fast and needs a lot of educated people. Changing the PR rules," he said, "makes them hesitate, but a combination of the positive factors, especially stability, will attract further students to come to Australia." The much touted links that they could provide back into China are not as strong as they might be. A recent survey found that 70% of Chinese students here could not name more than 5 Australian students at the university where they were studying. In a poll conducted in China last year, the Lowy Institute, Australia's internationally focused think tank, found that only 14% of respondents thought Australia is the best place to be educated. Below the US at 36%, Britain at 19% and Singapore at 15%. But Australia was seen as a good place to visit by 84%, a country with attractive values by 68%, reliable supplier of natural resources, of course, by 64%, and a country with a good political system by 57% of the Chinese people surveyed. That's quite interesting. A lot of new ideas are being discussed in this space, including joint campuses between Australian and Asian educational institutions, maybe even operated in third countries, and a new trend underway, having school students in Asian countries, starting with China, studying for Australian qualifications in special classes inside local schools. Our best-known Australian economist, Ross Garnaut, has recently completed a study of Papua New Guinea's higher education, together with Sir Rabi Namaliu, a former Prime Minister. They found the real expenditure per student there has fallen to less than 10% of what it was 35 years ago. They urge more twinning with Australian universities and other means of long-term close association. Professor Garnaut made one especially striking point when we discussed his review. It was that it is essential to invest in higher education to broaden the base of people who understand the importance of the country's core values and institutions, especially the rule of law. Finally, a big issue as the economies of the region are shifting from the manufactured exports base that projected them out of poverty towards a greater focus on consumption, on domestic markets and on services. This is naturally driving, together with demographic change and together with the peaking of the great migration from the countryside to the cities, the rapid evolution of labour markets and a new type of demand for more skilled, flexible and even articulate workers. A greater premium is being placed on creativity, on innovation, on new brands, on lateral thinking. And this naturally comes up against quite a barrier in education structures that have been shaped by Confucian models, which prize rote learning above all. I once interviewed the then director of the Academia Sinica in Taipei about education systems. He explained that he'd been brought up in a very traditional Confucian family as an obedient son, but he got a scholarship to an American university to read chemistry, and this is where, he confessed to me, he started to think bad thoughts. He began to think that his teacher, his professor, might be wrong. One day he plucked up the courage to say so, walked to the front of the class and explained his thinking on the blackboard. That day, he said, my life changed. He went on to win a Nobel Prize. The reason, he said, was that he was freed to think for himself by the Western education system that prizes creativity. Recently, the American writer and academic and lawyer and mother of 2 girls, Amy Chua, sparked a furore with her book, Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother. If you haven't read it, do try and read it. It's great fun and very disturbing. She says, a lot of people wonder how Chinese parents raise such stereotypically successful kids. They wonder what these parents do to produce so many maths whizzes and music prodigies, what it's like inside the family and whether they could do it too. Well, I can tell them because I've done it. Here are some things my daughters, Sophia and Louisa, who are now aged 18 and 15, were never allowed to do. Never allowed to attend a sleepover, have a play date, be in a school play, complain about not being in a school play, watch TV or play computer games, choose their own extracurricular activities, get any grade less than A, not be the number one student in every subject except gym and drama, play any instrument other than the piano or violin, not play the piano or violin. Even when Western parents think they're being strict, they usually don't come close to being Chinese mothers. What Chinese parents understand is that nothing is fun until you are good at it. To get good at anything, you have to work, which is why it's crucial to override children's preferences. This often requires fortitude on the part of the parents, because the child will resist. Things are always hardest at the beginning, which is where Western parents tend to give up. But if done properly, the Chinese strategy produces a virtuous circle. Chua follows the tradition of the Book of Filial Piety, attributed to Confucius and long part of what has become Confucianism. This says, filial piety is the root of virtue and the source of civilization. It begins with serving one's parents, one's rulers, and is completed by establishing one's character. Li Chuanxin, the writer of Mao's Last Dancer, whom I mentioned before, has 3 children with his Australian-born wife, Mary McKendry. He says that he is asked constantly about whether they are raising their children in the Asian or Western way. Lee, who was the Australian Father of the Year for 2009, says that his childhood growing up with 6 brothers in rural Shandong in northeastern China was certainly very different from that of his own children, Sophie, Tom and Bridie. He says, children are deeply influenced and their values shaped by their parents. His own parents, he said, were not overly strict like Amy Chua. They created a very loving environment, though they also had high expectations of us. Chinese parents impose more discipline, he says. But if we can help our children discover their passion in life, that's the most important thing. It is hard to bring the best out of you when you're being forced into something by your parents. For someone like me who has experienced both worlds, I believe a balance between the two has to be right. Kay Ganley talked just now about the importance of bringing a new balance to the region, and achieving such a balance is what I would hope days like today are all about. Thank you very much.